So this is an exploration into the mythtory of St Kentigern's, or St Mungo's, journey to Glasgow, as filtered through the minds of Ludovic Man, Harry Bell and myself. Now, I don't need to say much about this gentleman, who is the reason why you're all here today, except to say Mann was convinced that there was a geometry underlying the layout of Glasgow, and he also had a tendency to find astronomical connections with every site he seemed to investigate, famously once claiming that there was a total eclipse in Glasgow in 2983 BC, 6 days after the spring equinox at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, based on his investigations of 2 carbon ring marked stones. So although some of his conjectures may seem pretty way out to us today, I do think there's probably some kernel of truth in his theories. Harry Bell was interested in Alfred Watkins's theories on lays, although he didn't like the term and preferred to call his alignments prehistoric communication lines, which he found was more acceptable to archaeologists. And he came across Ludovic Man when he was trying to locate the Cochno stone for one of his alignments, unaware that it had been buried in 1964. But he did take on board Mann's idea that Glasgow was laid out on some geometric grid, and he was determined to discover it. His first book, Forgotten Footsteps, of which Kenny's been lucky enough to recently acquire a copy, was published in 1977 and looked at some lay alignments across central Scotland. Here's Harry's map of the lays that he found. He later wrote, "In 1976 I tried out Watkins's theory on my annual holiday. The end result was a map of alignments that zigzagged across central Scotland from the Kilpatrick Hills to Arthur's Seat. A redesigned version of the map, accompanied by a brief plagiarised history of British alignment research, went on sale in 1977, and half a century behind England, Scotland got its first book on ley lines, Forgotten Footsteps. It could truthfully have been described as a crime against archaeology, but it sold well and financed further research. Nothing I have written since has been so poorly researched or so profitable." I can genuinely credit Harry's book as being one of the main influences in developing my own interest in dowsing and alignment research. So this is my Google Earth interpretation of Harry's map, and if Google Earth had been around at the time, it would surely have transformed Harry's researches. In 1984, Harry published Glasgow's Secret Geometry, the pinnacle of his research, concentrating on alignments in the Glasgow area, although some of these had featured in the earlier book. And at this time he was also taking evening classes in archaeology in Glasgow University, so his writing was on slightly more firmer ground by this point. And again, here is my Google Earth interpretation of his alignments, with some additions from my own researches. Incidentally, you can find links to these Google Earth placemarks on my website. The third player in this little psycho-geographic drama is Glasgow's patron St Kentigern, or St Mungo. Harry was fascinated by the story of how he came to Glasgow, as told in the 12th century chronicle Life of Kentigern. Harry believed this journey to be the earliest record of a road in the Glasgow area, and it became a key lay in his Glasgow network. Ludovic Man also had an interest in Kentigern, and in Elias Glasgow, A Temple of the Moon, he proposed the idea that Kentigern's story contains some allegorical astronomical references, and we'll look at these a bit later on. But to tell the story properly, we're going to have to go right back to the start and look at the mythtory of Kentigern's birth. The story begins at Troprain Law, which was the main home of the Gododin tribe, who were ruled by King Lot, from which we get the term Lothian. Man equates Lot with the god Lu. Now Lot had a beautiful daughter called Tenu or Tenal, and one day Urien, the king of Reged, visited King Lot accompanied by his son Owain, who he wanted to broker a marriage contract with Tenu. Owain was smitten with Tenu's beauty, but she didn't fancy him at all, and so her father had her exiled from the hill fort. Now, Christian writers say that the reason she refused to marry the pagan Owain was because she had recently converted to Christianity against the wishes of her pagan father. But be that as it may, Owain remained completely besotted with Tenu, and he pursued her into the fields where she was working as a shepherdess. Now, consider the crescent symbolism, the lunar symbolism of the shepherd's crook here. This is the sort of thing Man was interested in. So Owain accosted her in the fields, and there he raped her. As a result of this union, she became pregnant, and because she was unmarried, her furious father had her cast from the heights of Troprain Law. Possibly this is an allegorical account of a significant moon or sunset alignment, thinking in Ludovic Man terms here. Anyway, miraculously surviving the fall, she was carried to Aberlady on the Firth of Forth, where she was cast adrift in a coracle and left to her fate. But thanks to the intervention of the sea god Manannan, whose magical boat Wave Sweeper, incidentally, was given to him by Lou. Instead of being washed out to sea, she travelled up the Forth estuary before making landfall at Couros, where she was taken into the monastic community that was run by St Cerf. And there she gave birth to Kentigern, who grew up in the community and was trained for the priesthood by St Cerf, and it was he who gave him the pet name of Mungo, meaning dear one. Now, by the age of 25, Kentigern had quite a few miracles to his name and decided to leave Couros and seek his fortune, or more likely the other students were more jealous of his favoured status with St Cerf and bullied him into leaving. Some of the miracles are told on the coat of arms of Glasgow, but I'm not going to go into that now. But how did he get from Couros to Glasgow? Harry Bell writes, St Mungo, aka Kentigern, is said to have led a burial procession down through the Campsie Fells to bury Fergus the Holy Man in a cemetery that is now beneath the flagstones of the cathedral crypt. I was curious about the route, so my next step was to search for the earliest written account of St Mungo's journey to Glasgow. Perhaps in this record of his journey there would be a clue about the nature of early roads or tracks in the Glasgow area. But first we have to get him across the River Forth. Now there are few places where he could have crossed the River Forth without the use of a boat. Charles Platt, in his book Pioneers of Our Faith, says that Kentigern crossed the Forth near the confluence with the River Teith, which is a little way upstream of the castle. This is the most likely location, and it's near where the M9 crosses the river today. It would have been difficult to cross anywhere else, but there is a possibility it could have been crossed at Alloa at certain times of year, and in the Chronicle Life of Kentigern it's claimed that he parted the waters like Moses to cross. I guess just possibly this could refer to something like a tidal bore at the springtide of the full moon, so more possible lunar connections there, I guess. The journey, according to Harry, begins south of Stirling at the ancient settlement of Old Sochie, and there's a medieval keep here that's been restored together with a few select upmarket houses now, but it is a much older site. And the next site on Harry's proposed alignment is Carron Fords, just beside Carron Bridge. Kentigern is said to have visited the holy man Fergus in a place called Kernack or Carnoch. Harry places this somewhere to the east of Old Sochie, and other researchers place it even further afield. But the Gaelic Cairnoch means Castle Hill, so it's a common enough name. However, there is a place called Cairnoch, less than a mile west of Carron Bridge, as shown in this old map, which seems a fairly likely candidate to me. Now, Fergus was a holy man who had heard of the miracles of the boy Kentigern and expressed a wish to pray with him before he died, and after his passing, Kentigern yokes up 2 untamed oxen to a cart and places the body of the holy man on the cart. Harry Bell. In his book, The Life of St Kentigern, I finally found what I was looking for, the earliest known reference to a road or track in the Glasgow area. It appears in the following extract from chapter 9, in the very first sentence in any historical record ever to mention Glasgow. And in truth the bulls, in no way being restive or in anything disobeying the voice of Kentigern, without any tripping or fall, came by a straight road along where there was no path as far as Cathures, which is now called Glasgow. I was ecstatic, he goes on. In a quiet corner of the reading room, I whispered the words over and over again to myself like a mantra. They came by a straight road along where there was no path. So let's explore that alignment. Here we're on the route of the alignment looking southwest towards Carron Fords. You can just about make out the Tachmadoon Road to Kilsyth through the trees here. If I move a little to the side, you get a better view, and on a sunny day it is actually possible to see Glasgow over the skyline there. So here is the alignment, and in the map view you can see it running down towards Glasgow at the bottom of the picture here. And we're looking back here at Carron Fords to the northeast. Now note the Scots pines on the skyline here. These are common ley markers, often said to have been seeded there by cattle drovers to mark the old drove routes. And the next site is Balcastle Motte. Harry Bell writes, this motte is believed to have been erected by the Earls of Lennox in the 12th century. A polished stone axe was found at Brayhead Farm nearby, right on the line of the straight road with no path. And we know that many of these mottes were actually built on much older prehistoric sites. This is likely to be one of those, I think. The next site is Auchendavie Roman Fort, of which little remains to be seen above ground. But Harry writes, during the construction of the canal in 1771, 5 Roman altars were found, one of which was dedicated Genio Terrae Britannicae, to the spirits of the British countryside. and all 5 of these altars are now in the Hunterian Museum. Here's a view of the straight road looking from Balcastle Motte towards Glasgow. So you can just see the necropolis here, and you might be able to make out Duncarnock Hill Fort on the horizon. Another Carnock name there. And there's our alignment. Moving closer to Glasgow, we come to Wallace's monument. This marks the site of the house where Wallace was betrayed to the English, and coincidentally it's right on Harry's straight road with no path. And just up the road from that is Wallace's well, which is worth a look. It's a nice little well, and it's certainly much better nick today than it was in 1911, as you can see. Moving into town, you can see the line extending from the Wallace monument to the necropolis. And here's an old picture of the necropolis to give you an idea of what it was like before the area became too built up. This shows the convergence of Harry's alignments at this point on the necropolis near to the Monteith Mausoleum. The necropolis is believed to be on the site of an ancient Druid temple, Dun Chatham, and Hugh Mackintosh, in his 1902 book, The Origin and History of Glasgow Streets, wrote, "The Fir Park and the banks of the Molendinar River, as well as a considerable expanse of the surrounding countryside, were at one time covered with a shadowy tract of forest. In ancient times, anterior to our ecclesiastical history, a druidical place of worship stood on the site of the present necropolis." Now, there are a number of holy wells around here. St Mungo's well is now situated in the corner of the crypt in the cathedral, but there was also a priest's well below the barony church, close to the banks of the Molendinar and just under the Bridge of Sighs. Here's the route of the Molendinar, which of course is now culverted under Wishart Street, so you can't really see it. And at the foot of the necropolis we find the Lady Well. The Lady Well is an artesian spring that in medieval times was just outside the city walls and the Drygate port of Glasgow. But it's much older than the town, and would certainly have refreshed Roman troops travelling to forts on the Antonine Wall. And today it's often erroneously believed to have been sunk for use of commoners denied access to the priest's well, or to have been capped in the early 19th century out of fears of pollution or plague. But in fact, it was still in public use while most of the other wells in Glasgow were capped, following the opening of the Loch Katrine Aqueduct in the 1860s. In fact, the Lady Well was the last public well to be closed, although the date is unknown, and sadly it's still capped today. There's a plaque commemorating the well's most recent refurbishment by Tennant Caledonian Breweries, who are just beside it, in 1983. Now, Tennant says that it does not get its water from the Lady Well, but that it's piped in from Wester Craigs. Yet Wester Craigs is just another name for the hill that the necropolis is on. So just think about all that accumulated effluvium from a couple of hundred years of dead bodies filtering down through the ground the next time you have a pint of Tennant's lager. Cheers! St Mungo's Well and the Lady Well are the two best known wells in the city, but there used to be another one, equally important, at St Enoch's Sanctuary to the southwest of the necropolis. And here there was a chapel and holy well dedicated to St Kentigern, the mother of Kentigern. In 1750 it was described thusly: "The ruins of a small chapel stood beside the well, whose waters were sheltered by a bush on which were to be seen, especially in early summer, bits of rags of all kinds and colours, while in the well itself enterprising boys were wont to get small coins. The rags and the coins were offerings of people, principally women, who came to drink of the waters of St Tenu's well and left these trifles as thank offerings. The well stood near a chapel erected over the tomb of St Tenu. The Trongate and Argyll Street, in fact, were once a country road leading to this shrine, and were known as St Tenu's Gate until around 1540. And the well was still in use in the early 19th century, but now its position is unclear. It's thought that it's maybe somewhere in Howard Street under the entrance ramp to the St Enoch car park. I think it'd be really great if we could get this opened up as part of the redevelopment of the area and have it visible again. Because Mann says that this spot was chosen because it lay at a vital locus within the spider's web, referring to his clock-face geometry of Glasgow. So what do we make of all this? Well, firstly, Mann had some interesting ideas about Kentigern being the head of a druidic moon cult. Now, historically, we know that the early Celtic Christians, the Culdees, were more akin to druids than Christian priests. So it's just possible, but perhaps there is a bit more to it than that. Maybe the story of Kentigern is encoding some astronomical information. Let's have a look. Mann interprets the etymology like this. King Lot he equates with Lu, the Shining One, Lu's usually depicted as a sun deity, and Traprain Law was the centre of sun worship according to Philip Coppens, but Mann says he was a moon god. Tenu he equates with Danu, who is the Irish mother goddess. She has some associations with rivers and water, therefore by reflection, the moon, and she's also associated with the moon according to Mann, who extrapolates her to Diana, the Greek moon goddess. He follows this with some decidedly dodgy Gaelic about the etymology of Kentigern, saying that Kentigern comes from Ken of T of Ern, head of the house of the moon. So I can't speak for these Gaelic translations, I'm not a Gaelic scholar, so let's move swiftly on. He writes, the calendric datings of Lu show that he was of the family of the moon and not a sun god as usually stated, but he doesn't explain this. His doings leave little doubt as to his identity. Having rested in his dark cavern, or as some think having hidden himself under the waters, yet carrying there his torch unextinguished, he at last emerged in the open. He stretched out his elbowed arm and his illumined hand over the sky. He thus, as a newborn moon, bestowed his blessings upon humanity. His coming they heralded with the thud of drums and the calls of curved trumpets, while tusked and crescent-horned beasts were offered to him, and these honours are still given to him in Africa and Asia. Really? He continues, to the Celt he was monarch of the outstretched silver hand, and was Lu of the long arm. His bow, like a curved golden thread, was spread against the dark heavens, like the gliding and shining wings of a bird. He made the rivers to bend into his own shape, and the shores of the seas and the lochs to twist into bays, and to his circle is his sanctuaries. And this he did at Glasgow. But hang on a minute. Let's go back to our Lothians map again. Despite Mann's insistence that Lu is associated with the moon, there are some interesting solar connections between the sites here, first noted by Philip Coppens. I think these are worth a wee look at. Now, Cairnpapel Hill and Traprain Law lie on this east-west alignment that runs through Arthur's Seat. Now that means that the sunrise on the spring and autumn equinoxes, as seen from Arthur's Seat, rises over Traprain Law and sets over Cairnpapel Hill, not on any day of the year, but on the spring and autumn equinoxes. And that's not all. The distance between these sites is largely equidistant. It's 28.9 kilometres between Cairnpapel and Arthur's Seat, 30.3 kilometres between Arthur's Seat and Traprain Law. And given that our modern surveying techniques are much more accurate than the ancient peoples, I think it's fair to say that they would have regarded this alignment and these three sites as highly significant. So, continuing in this astronomical vein, I wondered if there was any significant astronomy involved at the Glasgow end of the journey. So here's the alignment of Harry's Straight Road as it continues through the necropolis. I wondered what this alignment was. What was this sightline? The alignment continues to Camp Hill Earthwork, another key node point in Harry's network. It's located in Queen's Park, of course, and the azimuth is 212 degrees, which at this latitude is the azimuth of the major southern standstill moonset, which happens every 18.6 years, of course. Ludovic Man quotes, "At Glasgow, the lunar temple was placed on the rising ground nearest to the apex on the river's bend and above the floodplain." So does this lunar alignment lend weight to Mann's statement that Kentigern was high priest of a Druidic moon cult? What do you think? Also, we need to consider the two oxen in this story. The oxen's crescent-shaped horns kind of naturally link it to the three phases of moon symbolism, the waxing, the full and the waning. And Mann says, among the emblems of moon worship were a rounded bay, a river loop, a staff with a hooked handle, remember the shepherd's crook, and the crescentic horns or tusks of an animal, and at times even the animal itself. Now I was hoping for a significant alignment to his mother's holy well at St Enoch's as well. This azimuth is about 253 degrees, which indicates a sunset around October the 15th or February the 24th. However, the St Enoch's feast day is July the 18th. Damn. But talking about his clock face geometry, Mann says, the 31st radius on a dial of 38 radii proceeds from the cathedral to St Enoch's Square and passes in direct line through the centres of several sacred areas. This radial line is one of many, but may be here especially noted as it recalls the story of St Enoch, a Glasgow notability. The lunar monarchy of Lorth and Urien, claimed as a member not only Kentigern but also his mother St Enoch, surnamed St Tenach, Danu, Tanu, Tenu. She was descended from the mother moon Danu, whose tribe was the Tuatha De Danann, and it would seem probable far-off cousins of Diana. an immaculate mother and water goddess, she gave birth to Kentigern in a crescent boat, which was Lou's boat, Wavesweeper, if you recall. So I got wondering, do other Celtic saints have this astronomical connection? I think some further inquiry is needed here. Now, while we're here, there's some other significant alignments from the necropolis, including the summer solstice sunrise to Bar Hill, which is another Druid sanctuary, the one called Medionemiton, according to Harry. The Imbolc Samhain sunrise to Hamilton Mott, winter solstice sunrise alignment to Tinto Hill, and the summer solstice sunset to Duncolm in the Kilpatrick Hills. Finally, I wondered if Mann's idea of this 19 or 38 spoke wheel overlaying the city had any correspondence with Harry's network of aligned sites. Mann says, the Neolithic philosopher and astronomer laid out the Glasgow area on a plan similar to that of a clock face, and like a gigantic spider's web, but rigorously geometrical. Its radii, usually set out on a 19th divisional system, subdivided at times into 38ths and 76ths, dictated the positions and ran through loci of prehistoric importance. So here's just an overlay like that with 19 spokes, and you can see there's some correlation with at least 4 or 5 of Harry's network alignments, maybe another 3 or 4 if we were to go for 38 spokes. It's not perfect, but it's certainly pretty close. So I think maybe Mann was onto something with this idea, and Harry seems to have confirmed it with his alignments. So, what do we make of all this? Was Kentigern really the head of a lunar cult, as Mann claimed? Is Kentigern's mythtory simply an astronomical parable? Do other Celtic saints have similar astronomical connections? There does seem to be a correlation between Bell's Glasgow network of aligned sites and Mann's 19 to 38-fold clock face geometry. So this geomancy is about a relationship with landscape and place, and that's what I hope I've demonstrated in this little adventure. The sort of weave, the overlay of all this historical data, folklore, psycho-geography, geometry, astronomy and so on, all creates this multi-layered, multi-dimensional picture that enables us geomancers to work with and within the landscape, connecting with the spirit of place and revealing new ways of looking at things. And that for me is really what geomancy is all about. It does give you this extra insight into what's going on in the area. So I hope you've enjoyed this little psycho-geographic journey. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on your point of view, I'm not here to take questions. I probably haven't got time anyway, to be honest. But here's how you can get in touch with me and where you can find me on social media. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on anything that I've been discussing. So please send me an email, message me on Facebook, or send me a tweet. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thanks for listening.